Hello, students. Professor Benavides here. Let's talk about return values in Chapter 8. Now, what is a return value? A function doesn't always have to display its output directly. Instead, it can process some data and then return a value or a set of values. The value the function returns is called a return value. And the return value gets returned by means of a return statement. So what is a return statement? A return statement takes a value from inside a function and sends it back to the line that called the function. Return values allow you to move much of your program's grunt work into functions, which can simplify the body of your program. So returning a simple value, let's start there. Let's look at a function that takes a first and last name and returns a neatly formatted full name. So in the example that you see right here, you see the function defined on line 3, def get formatted name, right? So the information it brings in is first name and last name. This is the funnel in to the function. It utilizes those two string variables in a formatted string that is assigned to a variable called full name. This variable is then applied the title method before it is then returned. This on line 7 is the return statement. So the return statement on line 7, in this case, is returning the full name variable. But remember, none of this will happen unless we call the function. So we see here on line 11, we call the get formatted name function and we pass it Jimmy and then Hendrix. Jimmy goes into first name and Hendrix goes into last name. Those two strings are then placed in the placeholders of this formatted string and returned. This return variable is then assigned to the musician variable. Notice on line 11, we call the method. Excuse me, I'm still thinking about Java, right? We call the function get formatted name. That is the call. The flow of return, the flow of control goes from line 11 to line 3 all the way to 7 and comes back here. It gets the full name and puts it in musician. Then musician is then printed. I go ahead and contrast that with simply issuing the print statement or the print function by itself and embedding the get formatted name in it. This is to just simply contrast the idea that your author said, well, you call the method and the return statement allows you to then assign that return to a variable. Well, not everybody uses that particular style. I prefer that style. I think that doing it on 2 lines is easier on the eyes to see and understand than to simply do it all on 1 line. Let me just go ahead and run this so that we can see that the first line is Jimi Hendrix, the second one is Jim Beam. I wonder who he is, right? All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at our next example. The next example talks about, goes over this in more detail. But remember, let's don't lose sight of why we're using these functions. I mean, the one that we just did looked like a lot of trouble, but basically, you have to consider working with a large program that needs to store many first and last names. Consider that separately. And Functions like get formatted name then becomes very useful. You store first and last name separately and then call the function whenever you want to display the full name. So the usefulness of this function will become more apparent later on, say, for example, when we're dealing with databases where each of these fields are in a database. So we're only slicing out a little bit of understanding here. And the benefit of partitioning this and placing it into this function will become more apparent as time goes on. Okay, so now let's go ahead and consider what happens, you know, if we want to use an optional argument. But before I go to the optional argument, let's go ahead and just look at this simple example here. This function on line 4 has three parameter variables. But the question is posed here, what happens if I only pass 2 arguments and there's 3? Well, you know it's going to crash, right? I mean, do I have to show you that if I run this program, line 9 and 8 will work just fine because I'm passing 3 arguments and I have 3 parameter variables. So it works. John goes into first name, Lee goes into middle name, and Hooker goes into last name, right? Boom, 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 right? Anybody remember that? Okay, so then we have line 12 that sends only John and Hooker. Now it's going to get all mixed up because it's going to put John in first name. It's going to put Hooker in middle name. It's already the beginning of a mix up, and then it's going to choke. So let me go ahead and prove this to you. Let's go ahead and run this. And there we have it. We have a type error. And what it's telling us that we're missing one required position argument. We're missing last name. I don't know. I know you say, well, got last name there, but it thinks we're missing last name because we only provided 2. So it was the beginnings of perhaps a logic error there. If we were to say John Hooker Lee, then the last name goes in the middle name and vice versa, and you have a royal mess. Okay, so basically, how do we deal with this situation here? We can deal with this by creating an optional argument, right? Because we don't want to crash. Now, these optional arguments, we kind of like set the stage for them in the previous section of this chapter. We're going to set it to the empty string. Let's go ahead and take a look at that. So what we're going to do here, let me just go ahead and run it. So we're going to go ahead and set the middle name variable to the empty string. Now, the empty string is a really important idea in programming. It's really important that you understand that the empty string, many times used to initialized variables. In this particular case, a lot of times beginners want to put a space in here. Like this, look at this. You see that? The empty string doesn't take a space. Does not have a space. So that if I did put a space here and run it, see how there's a space now in between Jimmy and Hendrix an extra space that I don't need? So again, the empty space does not contain a space in there, even though it says the word empty space. Actually, empty space means no space, right? So what we're going to do here in this method is we're going to perform a test. This test, it says on line 6, if middle name. Now this syntax here is kind of like shorthand for if there's something in middle name. So the non-empty string, a non-empty string is true. So if there's something in middle name, it's true. If there's nothing in middle name, the else fires. And then finally, in this function, the return statement returns the full name that we created. So full name is then passed to line 14 where it's assigned to musician, and then we go ahead and just simply print. Okay, so line 14 handles the situation just fine, Jimi Hendrix. But now we have 3 arguments, and what happens here is that the third one is then the middle name, okay? So if you remember in the previous example, it crashed because line 14, I issued something like line 14, and as you know, you got to match up. It's one of those rules that if you're just using this positional arguments here, or positional, parameters here, they've got to match up unless you're using an optional, parameter, an optional, if you're going to be sending an optional argument, right? So this is how you can go ahead and deal with the situation where you can pass it 2 or 3 variables. So to make the middle name optional, we can give the middle name argument an empty default value and ignore the argument unless the user provides a value. To make the get formatted name work without the middle name, we set the default value of middle name to an empty string and move it to the end of the list of parameters. In the body of the function, we check to see if a middle name has been provided. Python interprets non-empty strings as true. So if middle name evaluates to true, a middle name argument is in the function call, right? So why use these optional values? So optional values allow functions to handle a wide range of user cases while letting function calls remain as simple as possible. Okay. So now let's talk about what we returned here. This is an example of returning a value. In other words, we're talking about a variable, in this case, a string variable, but it could have been a number, maybe the result of an equation. The next example here proves the idea that we can go ahead and return we can return lists, we can return dictionaries. So let's go ahead and take a look at our first example here. So what can a function return? A function can return any kind of value you need it to, including more complicated data structures like lists and dictionaries. For example, the following function takes in parts of a name and returns a dictionary representing a person. Let's take a quick look at this. On line 3, we have our function definition. Line 4, we have our docstring. Line 5, we have the dictionary that's being constructed. So it's key value pairs. First gets first name, last gets last name. And this is how we create this dictionary called person. It is then returned on line 6. Then on line 9, we have our call. And when we call build person, we pass it Jimi Hendrix. We're going to run this. And the return is the actual dictionary, which is assigned to musician. And then we simply print musician on line 10. And that gives us the output that you see. First name gets Jimmy, last name gets Hendrix, right? Just so that you know here, this return statement, if I were to forget it, I'm going to simulate that by putting in a comment and run it. You would get none. Now, why would you get none? Basically, you get none because there is nothing being assigned to the variable called musician, so that when we print it, it prints none, right? All right, so we're going to go ahead and run it again and verify that it's working just fine. before we go in and talk about the optional parameter. Now that dictionary is still here, but we're adding a test, a conditional test. And so we say if age, that means, is there something in age? If age has none or age has 0, then it would simply return person. But if it does have something in it, then we would then add age to, or create a key value pair that is then added to the dictionary. So you'd end up with first gets first name, last gets last name, and age gets age. All right. So then on line 11, I go ahead and have my call, and I pass Jimi Hendrix, age 27. Okay. Now, when we call the method called build person, the flow of control leaves line 11, goes up to line 3. So Jimi goes into first name, Hendrix goes into last name, 27 goes into age. And since there's something in age, the test on line 7 fires, and then the age is then added to the dictionary. So in that particular case, it runs. Let me go ahead and run this. And the first time I print it out, it says Jimi Hendrix 27. And the second time I go ahead and call it on line 14, I don't pass age. So what happens here is that when I get to the test on line 7, there's nothing in line 7. So line 7 doesn't catch. It simply returns person. It returns the dictionary. And the only two things in that dictionary are first and last. So that is what prints. By the way, Jimi Hendrix, he did pass away when he was 27. That's talk about coincidence. Let's look at that. Janis Joplin died at age 27. Kurt Cobain died at age 27. Jim Morrison, I believe, died at age 27. And then Jimi Hendrix. It seems like 27 is a pretty dangerous age, wouldn't you say? So what we just did here is we extended the function to accept optional values, and so we add an optional parameter called age to the function definition and assign the parameter the special value none, right up here, which is used when a variable has no specific value assigned to it. Remember, we talked about that earlier on here. All right, so what is none? You can think of none as a placeholder value. In conditional tests, none evaluates to false. So how does this function work? Well, basically, if the function call includes a value for age, that value is stored in the dictionary. This function always stores a person's name, but it can also be modified to store any other information you want about a person. Okay, so now we go on to talking about using a function with a while loop. And here's our example on this. Let me go ahead and run this. Now, notice how we're going to be using the input function. And remember that Sublime does not use the input function. So I'm going to go ahead and then just run this from the command line. So let me go ahead and run that. So to run it, you would go to that directory and you would type in Python space in the name of the Python file, including the py file extension. Let me just go ahead and run it, and then we'll come back and talk about it so we get an idea. Well, maybe I should tell you a little bit about it first. Yeah. So this is using a function with a while loop. So the function definition is on line 3, the body. of this function creates a formatted string that is then returned on line 6. Then on line 10, we have the beginning of our while loop. And yeah, we got a problem. We got an infinite loop. It's going to happen. You're not cooking with gas until you get an infinite loop, right? So what's the problem? The problem is that we don't have a quit condition on here. Now, you probably forgot about it, like where it says, please tell me your name. So you put in your first name and your last name. It puts it in the formatted string, and then it says hello, first name, last name, right? But then guess what? It loops back again. So how in the world is this loop ever going to be false? Remember, this while loop iterates on truth and will exit on false. So looking at this code here, I don't see how it can become false. Let's just go ahead and run this endless loop. So even though it says enter Q at any time to quit, I forgot to write the code for it. So it's an endless loop, right? So I'll just put in here Bob, that's my first name, Benavides. Right. So let's say that I want to quit right now. So I put in the Q and press enter. Put in the Q. Guess what? It's not getting the idea, right? How in the world do I get out of here, right? Hold on the control key and press C4, cancel. Okay. So what we're going to talk about next is fixing this infinite loop. So in the next example here, we're going to go ahead and fix the infinite loop, and that's going to be done with, we're going to go ahead and use the break statement. We're going to perform a test to see if they entered in Q. And I don't particularly like this design because you have to put in Q for the first name or last name. I like the design is when you make the loop, after you ask for first name and last name, you say you prompt then, do you want to enter in another name, and yes or no. I like that particular style better, but this is the way this particular program went on here. So let's go ahead and run this. So if I'm in the command line, I'm just going to press the up arrow key. That puts in the previous command, and then I can simply edit that line of code and issue it again. So first name Bob, last name Benavides, and then I'm going to put in another person. And now I'm finally going to put in a Q. And notice when I put in the Q this time, it drops out of the loop because what happens here, it did become false. It broke out of the loop. It's a little bit different than becoming false. It's kind of like brute force, isn't it? It's, a way of getting out of the loop. And perhaps that was a point here, is that in order to create a quit condition, you're going to need to make the loop false, or you're going to have to go ahead and do a brute force exit. And we're doing that brute force exit with break. What does break do? It breaks out of the loop. Now, when it breaks out of the loop, does that mean it's going to continue and go to the next line? No, it broke out of this loop. The whole loop, this loop goes from line 7. Look at this. The way you can know what's in a loop, if you're not sure about the way you space stuff, because some people put blank lines and some people don't. I do, because I like to separate the code on here visually, so you can expand and collapse your view of things on here. So in this particular case here, since this particular loop, when you issue the break statement, that means it's not going to go and do all the rest of the stuff. It doesn't say hello formatted name, right? So I entered in like Betty Benavides, and it says hello Betty Benavides, and then I put in Q, and that was it. So it's like a really crude way to get out of a loop. I would prefer to use another if, but it's always good to know that there's two ways to get out of the loop. Let me just leave you with a couple of more thoughts on this, is that according to PEP 8, and I haven't been able to get used to this too much, they like to have on PEP 8 two blank lines after the function before you have another section of code. I typically like to have only one, but there's actually some programs, like for example, that you can install in Visual Studio Code, like I think it's called Auto PEP 8, so that it will automatically fix your code to PEP 8 conventions, whether you like it or not. So I don't think I've complied with that in all of my, so maybe I should, since I'm teaching the class, so that you should have, according to the book, PEP 8 wants to have two blank lines after a function before you write your next line of code. Okay, that's what they say. All right, let's go ahead and talk about try it yourself. And I'm going to go ahead just to do something different. I'm going to go ahead and do the try it yourselves in Visual Studio Code. Okay. So here's the first one on here. And the first one, it's 8.6. It's called city names. It says write a function called city country that takes the name of a city and its country. The function should return a string formatted like Santiago, Chile. Call your function with at least 3 city country pairs and print the values that are returned. Okay, so here is my definition. I'm just expanding and collapsing it there. And the definition takes city and it takes country, and it creates a formatted string that is returned. Then I call it on line 7, I call it on line 10, I call it on line 13, and have print statements after each call. All right, so to go ahead and run this, there it is. There's my output. So Santiago, Chile, you know where that is, right? I wonder where that last one is. Don't think that's in Alaska. That looks like it's like maybe in Iceland. I always like to look up stuff that the author uses. I didn't get a chance to look that particular one up on here. But one thing I wanted to do, that I want to do with these simple examples, is show you the flow of control by means of debugging. Let's see if we can go ahead and do that. Now, when we debug, it's usually done to find errors in your code, but I use it simply to show students the flow of control as to how your program works. So let's go ahead and let's see if I can go ahead and do this with just a simple step into. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start the debugging program file, and I'm going to go ahead and it ran right away. So I guess I should set a breakpoint. Let's set a breakpoint right there, and let's go ahead and try that one more time. Run start debugging program file, and this is what I was looking for up here. I didn't see it. So we set a breakpoint. The breakpoint just stops the program at a particular point, and I did it on the first line. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do step into. Now I can click on this, or I can press F11, right? So I'm going to press step into, and what it did was it called city country, and it went ahead and it's going to go ahead and return that string. So see how it comes back to that line? Remember the line that's highlighted is the line that's going to get executed but hasn't gotten executed yet. And then it finally prints it. See how it prints down below? It says Santiago, Chile. Let's continue to step in through this. I'm on line 10 now. See how it goes back to the method, the function. It stops right there on the return statement. and it hasn't gotten it won't execute it yet, but it will as soon as I press the step into, and it comes. Notice how it comes back. So the flow of control for calling a function is it leaves line 10, goes to line 3, does whatever's in that function, and then comes back to the place from which it's called. Now, this hasn't been assigned to city yet. So as soon as I press step into, if I point to city, it shows that it's got the city and the country in it. It hasn't printed yet. Notice how it hasn't printed yet. And as soon as I go ahead and do that, it prints it. So you already know how it goes, city and then print. All right, so that's a little demonstration of using the flow of control on here. Let's go ahead and take a look at this next one called album. And this next one, 8.7, take a quick look at this. Okay, so this deals with a method that builds a dictionary, receives an artist, and I've done this in 2 steps. So I one just called exercise 8.7 or 8_7 and 8_7b. So this is just a simple method, simple function that creates a dictionary and then returns it, right? So as you can see here on line 11, we call it and we pass the artist followed by the title. We pass the next artist followed by the title, the next artist followed by the title. So let's go ahead and run that. Okay, so what is it? When it calls make album, it puts Metallica in artist and Ride the Lightning in title. And then what we do here is we get those string variables and we use them as the value in our key value pairs. So artist gets artist.title, title gets title.title. And that will, so if you enter in the title in lowercase, in which they were, then they are then capitalized, right? So how do I modify this on the next one? To modify this on the next one, let's just go ahead and take a look at it. In this next example here, we use an optional parameter and we're still building a dictionary. But if we do pass it tracks, and we test for that on line 10, we say if tracks. If we pass it tracks, then we add that key value pair and return the album. So we go ahead and then add line 23 on here and pass it tracks of 8. Okay, so let me go ahead and run this. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4 calls, and it worked. The true test is the last one. On here, it is it sends tracks of 8 that, otherwise, if you don't send tracks of 8, this is what happens here. Tracks gets 0 if you don't send it anything. So what happens here is we say if tracks. Well, if tracks is 0, then that's not going to fire. On line 10, let me repeat that. If tracks is 0, then it's going to simply drop down to line 12 and return the dictionary. Now, if it's got 8, it's going to say if tracks, if there's something in it, then that will be a true condition, and that will then fire. Okay. Our last example on here, and I did this one in 2 steps also. So let me go ahead and go over this one here. This is 8.8. It says start with your program from 8.7. Write a while loop that allows the user to enter in the album's artist and title. Once you have that information, call make album. with the user's input and print the dictionary that created it. Be sure to include a quit value. Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and take a quick look at this. Here's my function at the top, and it's got 3 parameters. The last one is an optional parameter. We have the test on line 7 to see if there are tracks. If there are tracks, we add that to the dictionary and then return. If there are no tracks, it returns a dictionary without the tracks. So I have my prompts, and then I have my while condition on line 18. So I go ahead and prompt the user on line 19, and I say input title prompt. So it says, what album are you thinking of? And the user responds, and it puts it in title. But if they go ahead and put in the word quit, then it breaks brute force. It breaks out of this. Now notice how this was a little bit different from the one before. Instead of saying, repeating the name, this print statement is outside of this loop, guys. And this is on purpose here. Look at this. When I close this, that's one of the main reasons why you want to be doing stuff like this. If your eyes are playing tricks with you, basically everything that's indented is in that loop. So if you're having trouble visualizing that, just collapse and expand it to verify that the loop just goes up to 28 and line 30 will fire, regardless of whether this loop is true or false, right? Because this break statement just breaks out of the loop. It doesn't break out of the program. It's not, going to go ahead and break out of the whole thing, okay? Let's go ahead and test this, and then we'll compare that with the next example on here. So what album are you thinking of? And let's go ahead. The album, I'll just say Number of the Beast. I never heard of it. I'm just typing it in because it's an example in your book. Who's the artist? Iron Maiden. Okay. What album are you thinking of? Let's try another one here. Touch of Class. Artist, Angel Romero. Or Angel? No, I don't know. And then now I'm going to go ahead and, in this particular case, remember that at the very top, it says enter quit at any time to stop. So I'm going to go ahead and then type in here, quit, and press enter. And then it does say, thanks for responding. And it says that because remember, thanks for responding is outside of this loop. Now that was the end of your chapter, but then, no, not really the end of the chapter. Here, look at this, 8.8. I was wondering why this function has a test for tracks, but we never prompt for tracks. So I went ahead and did it with the tracks. Big deal, right? So it was kind of easy to do. I just added the prompt, and then I copied and pasted this little section here, and I substituted album for title, and added the word tracks on there and printed album. So let me go ahead and test this out so that we could see the test going on here. So let me go ahead and try it one time, without tracks, and one time with tracks. Okay, so let's go ahead and run it. All right, so what album are you thinking of? Let's put in the same ones, I guess. Rust in Peace. I never heard of that. Have you? And the artist is called Megadeth, right? Never heard of that. Okay. And then now it asks for tracks, so I'll put 15 in here, I guess. So then what album are you thinking of? I'll try the Number of the Beast. And that is Metallica, or Iron Maiden, excuse me. Number of tracks, I'm going to go ahead and press enter. And in this case, I'm going to type in quit. And it says, thanks for responding. So I have to go ahead and expand my view here so that we can go ahead and see what happened. So the program starts right here. And it says enter quit. What album are you thinking of? Rust in Peace, Megadeth 15. So then it goes and prints it. And then I just enter in Number of the Beast and Iron Maiden, and I press enter for number of tracks so that nothing goes in. So if nothing goes in, if nothing goes into it, then what? If nothing goes into it, then tracks gets 0, right? So if 0, right, 0 is not a truth statement, right? It has to go ahead and have, some value in there, And you could always test this by going and doing a walkthrough on this if you want. Like say, for example, let's just do it on the first one. I guess I can start my breakpoint right there, and we're going to go to run, start debugging the file. And all right, so we have to press the step into, and then it says enter quit. If you could see that on there, give it a little bit more space. No, it's kind of hard to see when you're debugging. So step into, what album are you thinking of? So the way spell Abbey Road? And then it checks for quit, right? And then artist. And then it checks for quit again. And then now it's going to check for tracks, and I don't remember the tracks, right? So I'm just going to press enter. So it checks for quit again, and then it calls make the album on here. It calls the function. Then it goes into the function, and it makes the dictionary. It's putting artist, the key value pair for artist, the key value pair for title, and then it checks for tracks, and then tracks did not fire because tracks has the empty string, which is, I guess, what on nothing, there was nothing used. There was nothing used in that particular case. So then it returns the dictionary. So I should have said the empty string rather than 0. Okay, so then we go on, and it's a good that you walk through it like this so we can actually see, and it prints the dictionary. Okay, and I mean, you could continue to loop through this. To stop, you just click on the stop button, and you can stop your debugging. All right. All right. Well, that's the end of this chapter, my friends. On return values and return statements. And I also introduced the idea that if you forget the return statement, on here, that you get none. So let's go ahead and try that out on this one here, see that if it works out. Oh, that's not what I wanted, right? Okay. There we go. Let's go ahead. Oh, I'm in Visual Studio Code, right? So we get none, 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 you know? And we could walk through this one also so that you could see. I think walking through them is good. You know, it's a good a way of learning the program, like that little distinction. If you add little things to these programs, like I just did, you may find a little thing that you understand a little bit better, or maybe you thought you understood it, but you didn't. And by going through the code and walking through it and seeing what's inside of each variable, then you understand it better. Okay. Well, that's all I have to say about this section. Hope to see you on the next one. Professor Benavides, over and out.